He thought he controlled every room he walked into, until a waitress whispered a warning that saved his life, and then stole from him in the same breath. The restaurant glowed with warm amber light, the kind that softened marble floors and made crystal glasses shimmer like quiet wealth, and Adrian Volkov sat at the center of it all, still as a statue carved from money and power, his tailored suit pressed sharp, his presence heavier than the low jazz drifting through the room, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice because everything around him already listened, and yet tonight, something shifted, something small and almost invisible. Because across the polished floor, weaving between tables with practiced ease, Tasha Williams moved like she belonged everywhere and nowhere at once, her black uniform simple, her expression calm, her eyes lowered just enough to be overlooked, but not enough to miss anything, and when she approached his table with a bottle of wine balanced in steady hands, there was a flicker, a pause so brief no one else noticed, as if the air itself hesitated, and then she leaned in just slightly, close enough that only he could hear, her voice barely above a breath. "Run," the words slipped between them like a secret that didn't belong in a place this polished, and Adrian didn't flinch, didn't move, but something behind his eyes sharpened instantly, decades of instinct coiling tight beneath his calm exterior, because men like him didn't survive by ignoring fear, they survived by recognizing it before it arrived. And in that single second, he stood, smooth and controlled, as if excusing himself from dinner, his chair sliding back without a sound, and then it happened, not chaos, not anything loud or obvious, just a subtle disruption, a ripple through the room that no one could quite name, conversations pausing, a glass tipping somewhere in the distance, and in the reflection of a mirrored column, Adrian caught the truth, a movement that didn't belong, a pattern out of place, and by the time anyone realized something was wrong, he was already gone from where he had been sitting, stepping away from the center of attention as if he had planned it all along, and when the moment passed, when the tension dissolved into confusion and whispers, the world slowly returned to normal, but Adrian did not, because now he was watching her, the waitress who had just saved him, and she was already walking away, her posture unchanged, her pace steady, like nothing had happened at all, and that's when it became something else entirely, because as she passed behind him, as close as a shadow brushing against light, her hand moved once, precise and effortless, and the expensive weight on his wrist, the custom watch, a piece no one touched, a symbol of time he owned, was gone, not fallen, not misplaced, taken, and she didn't look back, didn't hesitate, just disappeared into the rhythm of the restaurant, leaving behind a man who suddenly understood that this was no accident, no coincidence, because she hadn't just saved his life, she had chosen him. And for the first time in a long time, Adrian Volkov didn't feel in control, he felt curious. And that was far more dangerous. Adrian did not check his wrist immediately, because men like him did not react, they calculated, but the absence was there all the same, a silence where something valuable had once rested, and as he stepped into the private corridor behind the dining room, away from the soft music and polished smiles, his fingers brushed bare skin and confirmed what his instincts had already told him, she had taken it, clean and effortless. And for a moment he simply stood there, not angry, not yet, but focused. In a way that made the air feel thinner, because this was not theft, this was intention, and intention always meant a message. Behind him the muted sound of footsteps approached, his security detail moving with quiet urgency, waiting for instruction, but Adrian did not turn right away, his gaze fixed on the reflection in the dark glass panel ahead of him as if he could still see her passing through the room, unbothered, unafraid. And that was the part that did not fit, most people who crossed a line with him either did not understand the consequences or spent their final seconds regretting it, but she had neither hesitated nor panicked, she had moved like someone who already understood the rules and chose to break them anyway, and that made her something else entirely. "Find her," he said finally, his voice low and even, the kind that did not need repetition, and within seconds the quiet machine around him shifted into motion, not chaos, never chaos, just precision, doors monitored, exits observed, every path mapped without disturbing the illusion of normalcy inside the restaurant, because nothing about Adrian Volkov's world ever looked out of control. From the outside, minutes passed like measured breaths, and then one of his men stepped closer, speaking just enough for him to hear, "She is still inside," and that was unexpected, because anyone reckless enough to take from him should have been running, disappearing into the city before the realization set in, but she had not left, she was still here, somewhere between the tables and shadows, and Adrian felt something shift again. Not irritation, not anger, something sharper, curiosity-edged. With calculation, "Bring her to me," he said, and this time he turned, moving deeper into the private section where the lights dimmed and the walls held conversations no one else heard. The room they chose was quiet, controlled, a space where power did not need to announce itself, and when the door opened again, she walked in without resistance, not dragged, not forced, just guided, her posture the same as before, her expression composed, as if she had expected this moment from the beginning. And for a second, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching thin and deliberate, Adrian studying her now without distance, taking in every detail he had missed before, the steadiness in her eyes, the absence of fear, the quiet awareness of where she stood, and then his gaze dropped briefly to her hands, empty, no sign of the watch, no nervous movement, nothing to betray where it had gone. "You made two choices tonight," he said at last. His tone calm but precise. "You saved me, and then you stole from me." He stepped closer, not aggressively, but with the kind of presence that filled space without effort. People usually choose one. She did not answer right away, and that pause, that refusal to rush, only sharpened the tension between them, because she was not playing defense, she was holding something back, and Adrian recognized that too. The room seemed to quiet even further, as if waiting for her to break, but she did not. She simply met his gaze, steady and unshaken, and in that moment, he understood that whatever this was, it was not over, not even close. She did not answer because she understood something Adrian rarely encountered, that silence could hold more power than explanation, and in that quiet moment she was not defending herself, she was measuring him, the distance between them no longer about space but about control, and Adrian recognized it instantly, not as defiance, but as awareness, the kind that came from experience, not fear. "Where is it?" he asked, not raising his voice, not needing to, his words landing with weight instead of volume, but she did not flinch, did not shift her stance, her hands resting loosely at her sides, her gaze steady as if she had already decided how far this conversation would go. "Safe," she said finally, her voice calm, not challenging, not apologizing, just stating a fact, and that single word changed something in the room, because it implied intention, not impulse, it implied a plan, and Adrian took a slow step closer, his expression unreadable but his focus absolute. "You risked everything for something you cannot even keep," he said, his tone sharpening just enough to test her. "That makes no sense," and this time she almost smiled, not amusement, not arrogance, just a quiet recognition of something he had not seen yet. "It makes perfect sense," she replied, and the way she said it, without hesitation, without fear, told him more than any explanation could have. Because people who lied to him always filled the silence too quickly, always tried to control the narrative, but she did not. She let the truth sit between them like something he would have to uncover himself. Behind him one of his men shifted slightly, waiting for instruction, the unspoken tension building, but Adrian did not break eye contact, because this was no longer about the watch, it was about understanding the person who had taken it. "You knew what would happen," he said, not a question, a statement, and she nodded once, simple, undeniable, yes, and there it was, confirmation that this was never an accident, never desperation. She had walked into this knowing exactly who he was, exactly what he controlled, and still chose to act, and that made her either reckless or deliberate, and Adrian was beginning to understand which one it was. "Then explain," he said, softer now, more dangerous in its restraint, but she shook her head slowly, not in refusal, but in timing, as if the answer existed, just not for him yet, not yet, she said, and the room seemed to tighten around those two words, because no one told Adrian Volkov to wait, no one decided when he would have access to information, and yet she had just done exactly that, without raising her voice, without stepping back, simply by standing her ground, and for a brief second, the air between them shifted again, not toward conflict, but toward something more complex, something neither of them had fully named. "You think you have leverage," he said, studying her carefully now, searching for the crack, the weakness, the reason behind her certainty, but she did not react the way others did when he pushed, she did not retreat, she did not argue, she just held his gaze and answered with quiet precision. "No," she said, "I think you need to know why I did it." And that was the moment Adrian understood that whatever this was, it was no longer about ownership, no longer about control, it was about information he did not have, and for the first time that night, he felt the shift clearly. She was not trapped in his world, she had walked into it with purpose, and that made her far more dangerous than anyone he had expected to meet in a place like this. Adrian did not respond immediately because control, real control, was never about reacting first, it was about deciding when the moment belonged to you, and right now the moment hovered between them like something neither of them had fully claimed, his gaze steady on her as if he could peel back the layers she refused to show, and for the first time that night he shifted the dynamic not by force, but by choice, stepping back slightly, creating space where pressure had been, and that subtle change did more than any raised voice ever could, because it was unexpected, it broke the pattern she had prepared for, and Tasha noticed it instantly, her eyes narrowing just a fraction, not in fear, but in recalculation, because men like Adrian were predictable in one way, they escalated, they asserted, they dominated, but stepping back meant something else, it meant he was thinking, "You are not afraid." He said, not as an accusation, but as an observation placed carefully between them, and she tilted her head slightly, considering him the same way he was considering her. "No," she answered, simple and unembellished, and the honesty in that single word carried more weight than anything else she could have said, because it was not bravado, it was certainty, and certainty came from knowing something the other person did not. Adrian let that settle, the quiet stretching again, but this time it was different, not a standoff, but a shift, as if the conversation had moved onto a deeper layer neither of them could ignore anymore. "People who are not afraid usually have a reason," he continued, his tone calm, almost conversational now, but every word still measured, still precise, and reasons can be useful, and there it was, the opening, not a demand, but an invitation disguised as logic. And Tasha saw it for what it was, the attempt to draw her into his rhythm, his way of extracting truth without asking for it directly, but she did not step into it, she stayed exactly where she was, balanced between what she knew and what she would allow him to know. "You are right," she said, her voice steady, "reasons matter," and then she paused, just long enough to make him wait, just long enough to shift the weight back toward her side, "but timing matters more," and that was when something almost imperceptible changed in Adrian's expression. Not frustration, not anger, something closer to recognition, because she was not resisting him blindly, she was guiding the conversation, controlling the flow without ever appearing to do so, and that required a level of discipline he rarely saw. Outside his own world, behind him, the room remained still, his men silent, aware that whatever was unfolding here did not follow the usual rules, and Adrian exhaled slowly, not out of impatience, but out of decision. "Then we adjust the timing," he said, and with that he turned away from her, walking toward the table at the center of the room, placing his hand flat against the polished surface as if grounding the moment into something tangible. "You stay," he added without looking back, not a threat, not a question, simply a statement of reality, "until I decide otherwise," and in any other situation, those words would have defined the end of the conversation, the clear line between power and submission, but this was not any other situation, and Tasha did not react the way most would, she did not argue, she did not nod, she simply watched him with that same steady gaze, as if she had already accepted that staying was part of her plan all along, and that realization, quiet and sharp, settled into Adrian's mind with unexpected clarity. She had not been caught, she had positioned herself, and now the only question left was why. Adrian remained by the table, his hand still resting against the smooth surface as if anchoring himself in a moment that refused to behave the way it should, because control usually came easily to him, it was built into every decision he made, every room he entered, every person who stood in front of him, but this situation did not bend, it shifted, and that difference mattered more than he let on. Behind him he could feel her presence without needing to turn, steady, composed, not pacing, not fidgeting, and that alone told him more than words ever could. She was not waiting for permission, she was waiting for something else, something internal, something tied to a timeline only she understood, and Adrian finally turned back toward her, slower this time, more deliberate, his eyes narrowing just slightly as he studied her again, not as a threat, but as a problem worth solving. "You walked into a place you knew you could not control," he said, his voice calm but layered now with something deeper, something analytical, "and you stayed after." Taking something you cannot keep, that is not desperation. He took a step closer, stopping at a distance that felt intentional, not invasive, that is purpose, and for the first time since she entered the room, something in Tasha's expression shifted, not fear, not regret, but recognition, as if he had finally stepped onto the correct path, and she exhaled quietly. The smallest release of tension that had been held tightly beneath her calm exterior. Yes, she said, and that single word landed differently than before, because now it carried weight, confirmation, not just of what she had done, but of why she had done it. Adrian watched her carefully, noting the subtle change, the way her shoulders relaxed just enough to suggest she was no longer deciding whether to speak, but how much to reveal, and that distinction mattered. Then we stop pretending this is about a watch, he said, his tone sharper now, not aggressive, but focused, cutting through the surface of the situation. What did you actually take? And this time, Tasha did not delay, did not redirect, she met his gaze directly, her voice steady but quieter, as if the words themselves carried consequence. Information, she said, and the room seemed to tighten around that answer, because information was not random, it was targeted, it meant intention, it meant planning, and it meant someone had chosen him for a reason. Adrian's expression did not change, but the silence that followed was different, heavier. Because now the stakes had shifted. This was no longer a question of property, it was a question of knowledge, of what she knew and what she had risked to obtain it. From me, he said, not asking, confirming, and she nodded once, slow and deliberate, yes, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke, because both understood what that meant. She had not just entered his world, she had accessed something within it, something he had not offered, something she had taken with precision, and that narrowed the possibilities quickly. Adrian's mind moving through connections, through people, through systems, searching for the gap she had found, because there was always a gap. No system was perfect, but finding it required more than luck, it required knowledge. You are not guessing, he said finally, his voice quieter now, more dangerous in its clarity. You knew where to look, and Tasha held his gaze, unwavering, her answer coming without hesitation. I knew what to look for, and that difference, subtle but critical, settled between them like a truth neither of them could ignore anymore, because it meant she was not reacting to him. She was responding to something larger, something already in motion, and Adrian felt it then, the shift beneath the surface, the realization that whatever she had taken was not just about him, it was about something connected to him, something close enough to matter. And for the first time that night, the question changed completely, not what she had done, but who she was trying to expose, and why she had chosen him to do it. The silence after her last words did not fade, it deepened, settling into the room like something alive, because now Adrian was no longer dealing with a question of theft, he was standing in front of someone who had reached into his world with intention and walked out carrying something that mattered, and that realization shifted everything, not outwardly, not in posture or tone, but internally. Where decisions were made long before they were spoken, he moved again, slow, controlled, circling. Not around her but around the situation itself, his mind mapping possibilities with precision, because information did not exist in isolation, it connected, it pointed, it revealed patterns, and the fact that she had found it meant there was a pattern he had not yet seen. You are not working alone, he said, not as an accusation, but as a logical conclusion, and this time she did not answer immediately, not because she was unsure, but because the question itself required something more than a simple response. Her eyes flickered for just a fraction of a second, not away from him, but inward, as if measuring how much truth could be released without breaking the balance she had built so carefully. No, she said finally, her voice calm but quieter now, carrying a different weight than before, and that answer, simple as it was, did not reassure him, it sharpened his focus, because working alone did not mean acting randomly, it meant planning with discipline, it meant knowing exactly what to risk and when to risk it, and Adrian recognized that kind of thinking. It was not common, it was not accidental. Then you chose me, he said, stepping closer again, not aggressively, but with intent, his presence filling the space between them in a way that demanded acknowledgment, not just this place, not just tonight. Me, and she did not deny it, did not soften it, she met his gaze with the same steady clarity. Yes, and that confirmation landed differently than anything before, because it stripped away coincidence entirely, leaving only purpose behind. Adrian studied her for a long moment, searching for the reason, the connection, the thread that tied her actions to him specifically, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not louder, not harsher, but more precise, like something narrowing in on its target. Why? And this time, the word was not a command, it was a pivot, the point where everything either stayed hidden or came into focus, and for the first time since she entered the room, Tasha allowed a small shift in her posture, not retreat, not weakness, but acknowledgement that the moment had arrived. The timing she had been controlling was now intersecting with his need to understand, and she exhaled slowly, her gaze steady but no longer withholding in the same way. Because you were supposed to be there tonight, she said, and the answer was not what he expected, not direct, not personal, but strategic, and Adrian's expression tightened just slightly, because that phrasing implied something larger, something planned beyond her own actions. Supposed to be, he repeated, the words deliberate, testing their weight, and she nodded once, her voice remaining calm but carrying an edge of urgency that had not been there before. You were not the target, she said, and in that moment, the entire room seemed to shift, the air tightening as if the meaning had arrived before the full explanation, because those words did not reduce the situation, they expanded it, and Adrian understood that instantly, his mind moving ahead, connecting implications faster than they could be spoken. If he was not the target, then his presence had intersected with something else, something already in motion, something she had seen before he had, and the silence that followed was no longer controlled, it was charged. Because now the question was no longer about what she had taken, or even why she had taken it. It was about what she had prevented, and who it had been meant for. Adrian did not move when she said it, because movement would have broken something that had just aligned in his mind, and alignment was rare. It meant pieces were finally connecting in a way that demanded stillness rather than reaction. His eyes locked onto hers with a focus that no longer searched for surface answers but for structure, for the architecture beneath what she was revealing. Then who was? He asked, his voice lower now, not out of restraint but out of precision, as if the question itself needed to land exactly where it belonged. And this time Tasha did not hesitate, because this was the moment she had been holding back, the moment where information shifted from implication to truth. Someone at your table, she said, and the words did not echo, they settled, heavy and immediate, because Adrian did not need time to understand what that meant. He replayed the evening instantly, every face, every gesture, every tone of voice that had passed unnoticed before, now returning with new weight, the polished laughter, the casual conversation, the way certain eyes had lingered just a second too long, and his expression did not change, but something behind it sharpened into clarity. You are certain, he said, not questioning her credibility, but confirming the stakes, and she nodded once, her gaze steady, unwavering. I do not guess, she replied. And that sentence carried more authority than anything else she had said so far, because it revealed not just confidence, but method, discipline, a way of seeing patterns others missed. Adrian turned slightly, not away from her, but toward the door, as if the room itself had become too small for what was unfolding, his mind already moving beyond the present, mapping possibilities forward, because if someone at his table had been the intended target, then the event had been designed, timed, structured around access, around proximity, and that meant the threat was not random, it was deliberate, calculated, and close. And the watch, he said, bringing his attention back to her, connecting the final piece, that is how you knew. And for the first time, Tasha's expression shifted in a way that revealed something deeper, not fear, but the weight of what she had taken on. It was not the watch, she said quietly, it was what was inside it, and the room seemed to still completely, because now the answer was no longer abstract, it was specific, tangible, something that could be traced, verified, understood. Adrian stepped closer again, his focus narrowing further. What is inside it? He asked, and this time the question carried urgency beneath its calm, because whatever she had found had already changed the trajectory of the night, and possibly more. Tasha held his gaze for a moment longer, as if measuring whether the truth would be received or dismissed, and then she spoke, her voice steady but edged with something that had not been there before, something closer to warning than explanation. A recording, she said, a conversation that was not meant to be heard, and Adrian's expression finally shifted, not outwardly dramatic, but unmistakable in its intensity, because recordings meant evidence. Conversations meant intent, and intent meant betrayal when it was hidden. Between who? He asked, the words precise, controlled, but carrying a weight that pressed against the silence around them, and Tasha did not look away, did not soften what came next. "Someone you trust," she said, and in that moment, the room did not just go quiet, it changed, because trust was the one thing Adrian did not question lightly. It was built carefully, maintained deliberately, and broken only once, and as the implication settled fully into place, he understood that whatever she had taken from him was not just information, it was a fracture, one that had been there long before she walked into the room, and one that would not stay hidden any longer. Adrian did not speak after that, because some truths did not require immediate answers, they required space to settle, to unfold, to reveal their full weight without interference, and the room held that silence like something fragile, something that could not be rushed without breaking its meaning. His eyes did not leave hers, but his focus had shifted beyond her now, reaching inward, reconstructing every layer of trust he had built, every alliance, every conversation that had once felt secure, and now carried the faint echo of doubt. "Play it," he said finally, his voice quieter than before, not weaker, but more deliberate, as if the next moment would define more than just the night. And Tasha did not move immediately, not because she was hesitant, but because she understood what that request truly meant. It was not just curiosity, it was willingness. The decision to confront something that could not be unseen once revealed. She reached slowly into the pocket of her apron, her movements calm, controlled, and withdrew a small, nearly invisible device, no larger than a matchbox, placing it gently on the table between them, the contrast almost ironic, something so small carrying something so significant. Adrian stepped closer, his attention narrowing to that single object, and when she activated it, the room did not fill with noise, it filled with recognition. Voices emerged, low, controlled, unmistakably familiar, not distorted, not unclear, but precise in a way that left no room for doubt, the kind of conversation that was never meant to be overheard, discussing timing, positioning, presence, not in explicit terms, but in language that only someone inside the structure would understand. And Adrian did, instantly, because he knew the patterns, he knew the codes hidden within ordinary phrasing, and more importantly, he knew the voice, the tone, the cadence that had once represented loyalty, now revealing something else entirely. And he did not interrupt, did not react outwardly, but the shift was there, subtle but undeniable, the tightening of his jaw, the stillness that became absolute, as if every instinct had aligned into a single point of clarity. Across from him, Tasha watched without speaking, not to observe his reaction, but to confirm what she already knew, that the truth would not need explanation once it was heard. The recording ended without drama, without conclusion, just silence returning to fill the space it had occupied, and for a long moment, neither of them moved, because the room itself seemed to be holding the aftermath, the weight of something that had just been exposed. Adrian reached forward slowly and turned the device off, not abruptly, not with anger, but with control, placing his hand flat against the table again, grounding himself in something tangible as the implication settled fully into place. When he finally looked up at her, his expression had changed, not softened, not hardened, but clarified, as if something uncertain had been replaced by something absolute. "You took this from the watch," he said, his voice steady, confirming the final connection, and she nodded once. Her posture unchanged. "Yes," and he studied her for a moment longer, not as an adversary now, not even as a problem, but as something far more complex, someone who had seen what he had not, someone who had acted when he had not yet known he needed to, and that realization carried its own weight, because it redefined everything that had happened since she walked into the room. "You did not steal from me," he said slowly, the words measured, deliberate, as if testing their truth as he spoke them. "You exposed something within my own walls." And Tasha did not respond, did not confirm or deny, because the statement was not for her, it was for him. The moment of recognition, the shift from accusation to understanding, and the room fell into silence once more, but this time it was different, not tense, not uncertain, but settled, as if something fundamental had just been corrected. And in that stillness, Adrian Volkov understood that the balance of power had not been taken from him, it had been redirected, and for the first time that night, he was not trying to regain control, he was deciding what to do with the truth. Adrian did not rush the moment, because rushing would have reduced it to something smaller than it was, and what stood between them now was not a simple exchange, not a debt, not even a confrontation, it was clarity, the kind that reshaped everything that came before it. He reached into his jacket slowly, not with tension, not with threat, but with intent, and placed the watch on the table between them, the same watch that had started it all, its polished surface catching the soft light as if nothing about it had changed, yet everything had. You could have walked away, he said, his voice calm, measured, carrying none of the earlier weight of accusation, only recognition. You had what you needed. And Tasha looked at the watch, then back at him, her expression steady, but there was something different now, not guarded, not distant, something quieter, something closer to truth. No, she said, her voice soft but certain, I needed you to hear it. And that answer settled into the room with a different kind of gravity, because it stripped away any illusion of self-interest, leaving only purpose behind. Adrian studied her for a moment longer, not as someone he needed to control, not as someone beneath his authority, but as someone who had made a decision that required courage, discipline, and an understanding of consequences most people would never willingly face. You knew what would happen after, he said, not as a warning, but as acknowledgment. And she nodded once, her gaze unwavering, yes, and there was no hesitation in it, no regret, just acceptance, and that was the part that mattered most, not what she had done, but how she stood after doing it, without fear, without apology, without asking for anything in return. Adrian exhaled slowly, the tension that had defined the night shifting into something more controlled, more deliberate, and when he spoke again, his words carried a different weight, not authority, not ownership, but decision. You do not owe me anything, he said, and the sentence landed with quiet finality, undoing the claim he had made earlier, undoing the imbalance he had tried to impose, and for a brief moment, neither of them moved, because the meaning behind those words was larger than the words themselves. It was not forgiveness, it was recognition, the acknowledgment that what she had done had not taken from him, it had given him something he did not know he needed. And Tasha looked at him, really looked at him this time, not measuring, not calculating, just seeing, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, not trust fully formed, not understanding complete, but the beginning of both. She reached forward and slid the watch back toward him, her fingers brushing the surface lightly before letting go. Then neither do you, she said quietly, and there was no challenge in her voice, no defiance, just balance, the restoration of something that had never truly been broken, only misunderstood. Adrian did not respond immediately, because some statements did not need answers, they needed to be absorbed, and as he picked up the watch and fastened it back onto his wrist, the motion slow, deliberate, it was no longer a symbol of control, but of something else entirely. Something earned rather than taken. He looked at her one last time, his expression calm, but no longer distant, no longer closed, and in that silence, the room seemed to hold its breath for a fraction of a second, as if marking the end of something and the beginning of something else, and then he stepped aside, not as a command, not as permission, but as choice, and she walked past him without hesitation, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, disappearing back into the world she had come from as if nothing had happened, and yet everything had, because in that quiet room, without witnesses, without applause, something had shifted that could not be undone, not power, not control, but perspective. And that day, without a single word spoken about it again, Adrian Volkov learned what dignity looks like.